بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد, then we continue this evening the book of the great Imam Muhammad bin Hussein, or rather the great Imam Abu Hatim ibn Hibban al-Busti, Muhammad ibn Hibban al-Busti rahimahullah ta'ala, Abu Hatim, the great Imam, the Hafiz. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. The 11th chapter of the book, Dhikru, a mention of ma ubiha min al-mizah lil-mar', of what is allowable, what is okay, of al-mizah, al-muzah or al-mizah, joking, a person being lighthearted and telling jokes or being humorous. وَمَا كُرِهَ لَهُ مِنْهُ, now what is disliked of that, what is disliked or forbidden of that, what is disliked. And karaha has both the meaning of what is disliked and what is forbidden, because what is makruh, the Imams of the Salaf in the time of the companions and the Tabi'een, usually when they used this word makruh or kariha, that which is disliked, it meant what is forbidden. And in the istilah of the scholars thereafter, it came to be more commonly used to distinguish between what is absolutely forbidden and that which is disliked but doesn't carry in and of itself a punishment. So there are things that are permissible, things that are disliked, and things that are impermissible when it comes to joking. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, حدثنا أحمد بن علي ابن المثنى حدثنا حدبة بن خالد حدثنا حمام بن يحيى حدثنا قتادة عن أنس. He reports with the chain of narration to Anas bin Malik, a hadith that is found in the Sahihain. And the Sanad al-Bukhari, and he goes, and he from himself, and he with different areas to Hammam ibn Yahya, with the same chain from Qatada, from Anas. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, kana lahu khadim, he used to have a servant, yuqalu lahu Anjasha. Anjasha is what they used to call him, like a nickname. Anjasha was his name. And he said, وَكَانَ حَسَنَ الصَّوْتِ, and he was a man who had a good voice. And they used to make hadu of the camels. When you're traveling, have you ever traveled with somebody from the old countries before? You travel with people from Yemen especially. People in different countries, they do that thing. It's like something to pass the time. It's like a chant, like a mantra that they say over and over again. They recite some type of poetry, that sort of thing. So Anjasha, and he was a man with a good voice. He used to drive the camels, the camels, the horses, this sort of thing. And they enjoy a melodic tone. A person, and in many cultures they have these sorts of things where they'll say something over and over again to pass the time, and with a certain intonation. So he used to drive, like not physically drive like you think with the reins, but he used to drive them by walking alongside them and that sort of thing, and doing this. فَقَالَ لَهُ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and so the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, he said, رُوَيْدَكَ يَا أَنْجَشَ. رُوَيْدَك, مَحْلًا, you take your time, take it easy, slow down, يَا أَنْجَشَ. Slow down, يَا أَنْجَشَ. لَا تَكْسِرْ الْقَوَارِيرِ. And the one wording, رِفْقًا بِالْقَوَارِيرِ. Don't break the glass vessels. The qawarir, and qawarir are things that are made of crystal. So a vessel, a cup, or something of the sort that's made out of crystal or made out of glass, and it's called qawarir. Obviously, something that is made of crystal or made of glass is very delicate. So the Prophet ﷺ, in a joking way, told him to slow down. You don't want to break the fragile vessels. The fragile vessels being the woman. Fragile vessels being the woman. So this is from the lightheartedness of the Prophet ﷺ. Likewise, the scholars, they quote when they talk about the muzah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Abu Umair, ma fa'al al-Nughayr? Ya Abu Umair, what did the Nughayr, what happened to the Nughayr? What's going on with the Nughayr? Nughayr is a small bird. I think this is like yellow bird with a black beak or something like that. That is common to the area, is native to the area. So they used to see this little boy, he used to play with this bird. He said, Ya Abu Umair, what did the Nughayr do? What's going on with the little bird? The Prophet ﷺ would be lighthearted. He would talk normal and regular with the people. He wouldn't be too serious or this sort of thing. And this is something that is from the khisan, it's from the traits of leadership. From the traits of leadership. And whether you're leading a family, whether you're leading a group of people, whether you're a teacher in a classroom, anything of the sort, to be lighthearted and to not be too serious. To not be too serious is very important. It's very, very important. And there's, of course, as it relates to every khaslah in Islam, from makarim al-akhlaq, there are tarafan wal-wasat. There are two extremes in the middle. قال قتادة يعني ضعفت النساء. Qatada, he said, what is meant by the qawarir, the fragile vessels, or the crystal vessels, are ضعفت النساء, the fragile woman. Any woman there more fragile than rough and tumble men and boys, right? So this is a reference to the fragility of women. Take it easy, slow down. Abu Hatim, he says, الواجب على العاقل أن يستميل قلوب الناس إليه في المزاح وترك التعبس. It is incumbent, necessary, important for the intelligent person. الواجب على العاقل, any wujub as a benefit, as we mentioned before, you could say wujub is of two types, that which is shar'i and that which is aqli. Right? That which is shar'i, and Allah has said it is mandatory, meaning that if you don't do it, you deserve to be punished. If you do it correctly and sincerely, that you deserve, or you will be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes, something can be called wajib, urfan, right? Urfan, as they say, la shukra ala wajib, right? La shukra ala wajib, these sorts of statements. A person feels compelled to be a particular way. Tab'an, their nature. If you want to be from those who are kurama, kareem, a person who is nice and kind and a good mannered person, a mannerable person, that you should be like that. So not necessarily every time you hear or you read in this book, which is in every chapter, al-wajib ala al-aqil, or la yajib. And it doesn't mean wujubun shar'i, and it just means it's necessary for a smart person, a wise person, if they want to incorporate wise practices and character, to be like this, that, or not to be like this, that, or the third. He says, الواجب على العاقل أن يستميل قلوب الناس إليه في المزاح. It's important necessary for the intelligent person, أن يستميل, that he draws, that he draws the attention of, or that he inclines, that he makes an effort to incline the hearts of people, turn the hearts of people towards him, fil muzah, in joking. This by itself shows us the guideline in this issue. That joking is something that should bring people closer together. Being lighthearted and humorous and jokey should be something that brings people closer together, as opposed to being something that is munaffir. Makes people not want to even talk to you or see you. People grow up playing the dozens. Right? You go to school with your siblings, play the dozens. Right? Telling your mama jokes, being insulting, talking about people's appearance from their head to toe. Talk about the colic in their hair to the holes in their socks. Right? You dissect a person, everything that's wrong with the person's appearance, right? And they turn it back on you, and they do the same thing. And people say this is a survival mechanism. That's what they say. They say it's part of inner city culture, it's a survival mechanism. But then the same people will say it's also something that commonly leads to violence. So which is it? Is it a survival mechanism, or is it something that gets people killed? Right? It starts out as we'll come to see, Ibn Hibban, he explains this in this chapter. It starts out lighthearted, or you should be able to take a joke. All of a sudden people are fighting, and then a fight turns to an escalation of violence, and then this family is against that family, this neighborhood is against that neighborhood, etc., etc. So he says, and he is important, necessary for the intelligent person to use and utilize al-muzah, humor and joking, to draw the hearts of people towards him. And especially people of knowledge and righteousness, and who want to call to the sunnah and advise people, so on and so forth. If people think that you're somebody who is too serious, they may be intimidated even to ask advice from you. So we say about people who only come to the masjid on Jummah. They see the khatib, the student of knowledge, and the member are hollering and screaming, that sort of thing. You say, well, he's there, he's right there, just go ask him a question. They say, no, I'm good. It's not that serious. So, if a person has that sort of impression of you, that you're not a light-hearted person, and that you're too serious, that sort of thing, a person might not ask necessary advice from you, and that sort of thing, and whatnot. So he says, وَتَرْكِ تَعَبُّسِ and likewise it's necessary for him to leave off a ta'abbus, which is being gloomy and grumpy looking and that sort of thing, right? Frowning and scowling. He's to leave that off. We know the narrations we heard in the previous chapter about the Prophet ﷺ smiling, and Prophet ﷺ being pleasant in his appearance generally. So this is above and beyond that. And along with giving the salams, what was mentioned in the previous chapters, and smiling and being pleasant, that sort of thing is very important. So Arabs, they say, and we heard a statement like that in the previous chapter, لِتَكُنْ كَلِمَتُكَ لَيِّنَا وَوَجْهُكَ مُنْبَسِطًا تَكُنْ أَحَبَّ إِلَى النَّاسِ مِمَّنْ يُعْطِيهِ مَعْطَاءٍ. I believe they attribute that same to Amr ibn al-As, and it's attributed to many. Al-Asma'i, you see, and sometimes many of the scholars will have said the same statement in different ways, that your words be pleasant and soft, and that your face be pleasant. Jovial, you smile in the face of people, make you more love to them than somebody who gives them from their wealth. This is something that comes with maturity. It's a sign of intelligence. And a person who is not like that, it could be taken as takabbur, and very likely, may be just that. It may be from a ta'ajjub, and a person being conceited. And this is something that the Salaf cautioned against, that a person who is a student of knowledge from the Qurra, from the Talabatul Ilm, that they are a person who has a scowling face, an unfriendly face, that sort of thing. This is not the way of our Prophet, alayhi as-salatu was-salam. And as one of our dear brothers mentioned to me, that there was a group of people who left off speaking to him, from the students of knowledge, in another country. And when he inquired about that, they said that he was too friendly. He said that this brother was too friendly, and that made them uncomfortable with him because he was too friendly. This is a type of silliness and immaturity that young people do amongst one another. So a person learns to have a sense of humor in dealing with people and taking things in the best light. It's important, especially in the beginning of a marriage. Sometimes people are very young, they're very immature, and the most valuable thing that they can tell their self is to be lighthearted. Be lighthearted. Don't take everything so seriously. And you look for a way to find humor in the situation. So some of the scholars mentioned about the statement of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, "Usikum wa inna Allah yusikum bin nisa'i khayra thalathan." Did Allah command you with good, kind treatment of the woman? He said it 3 times. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Then he said, Inna ar-rajula min ahl al-kitab. Not in the past, but in his time. Indeed, a man from the people of the book. And tazawwaj al-mar'a. And he marries a woman. And he said a statement, something like, وَمَا تُعَلِّقْ يَدَاهَا الْخَيْطِ. And before she learns to mend garments. Scholars, they say, as Ibn al-Athir, al-Barakat, he says, in the explanation of this hadith, what is meant by this statement, this phrase in the Arabic language. He says, هذه كناية عن صغر سنها. This is a word that is said about a woman that is very young. He said because the woman, Bani, he mentions a statement in Suhailah al-Hadith al-Sahih where he authenticates a hadith, and he mentions a statement of other scholars to say because a woman, when she's very young, and she's ta'isha, she's reckless, and she has a lisan that is sharp, she has a sharp tongue, and she doesn't know how to talk to people right? We know this. And those of us who raise our children, they get to be a particular age and they need to learn how to speak to people before you send them out of your house, right? So a person has to have a sense of humor in dealing with people and just be lighthearted generally in dealing with people. We mentioned last week the narration of the Bedouin who came to the Prophet ﷺ and grabbed him from his cloak from behind to the point that they said the eyes of the Prophet ﷺ bulged. And he said, Ya Muhammad, a'tini min malillahi alladhi a'tak. Muhammad, give me some of that money Allah gave you. The Prophet ﷺ, turned around and altafat wa dhahik. He turned around and he smiled. What you're going to do is a Bedouin. You can laugh or you can cry. People are frustrating like that sometimes. You deal with a Bedouin like a Bedouin. Somebody's ghetto, somebody's hood, or somebody's a Bedouin, somebody that's just how they are. It's how they are, it's how their mama was, it's how their daddy was, how their uncles are, it's everybody in their family growing up. That's just how people are. You're going to change them? The statement of Allah Ta'ala, the scholars, they mentioned that all of makarim al-akhlaq is gathered ajma' ayah fi kitabillah, the most comprehensive verse in the Quran that contains makarim al-akhlaq, especially when we talk about dealing with others, and the qualities of the leader is خُذَ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ وَإِمَّا يَنزَغَنَّكَ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ نَزْغٌ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. خُذ الْعَفْوَ أي ما يتسامح من أخلاق الناس، لا تنتظر من الناس أن يتكلفوا لك. And خُذ الْعَفْوَ, and he take what comes naturally from the dispositions of people, and what is from the taba'i of people. Don't expect for them to be unnatural with you. As they say, al-kulfa tudhibu al-ulfa. Inna al-kulfata tudhibu al-ulfa. The al-kulfa being unnatural, overburdening yourself, and he removes al-ulfa, removes comfort from people. Some of the scholars they mentioned, I believe, is a statement of Muhammad ibn al-Hanifiyya, rahimahullah ta'ala, from the great-great-grandsons of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or somebody from Ahlul Bayt, either him or Ja'far or Muhammad al-Sadiq, or somebody of the sort. He said, أَنِي أَحَبُّ إِخْوَانِي إِلَيَّ مَنْ that the most beloved of my brothers to me, مَنْ أَكُنْ مَعَهُ كَمَا أَكُونُ مَعَ نَفْسِي. And he's a person I can be with him like I am when I'm with myself, when I'm all by myself. I don't feel the need to be on airs around that person. Well, شَرُّ إِخْوَانِي إِلَيَّ, and the worst of my brothers in my estimation, مَنْ يَتَكَلَّفُ لِي وَأَتَحَفَّظُ مِنْهُ. مَنْ يَتَكَلَّفُ لِي وَأَتَحَفَّظُ مِنْهُ. And the worst brother, the worst type of friend that I have is a person, يَتَكَلَّفُ لِي, who feels the need to be unnatural with me. وَأَتَحَفَّظُ أَتَحَرَّزُ أَتَحَفَّظُ مِنْهُ. And I feel on guard against him. He's unnatural with me and I'm unnatural with him. I don't feel irtiyah, I don't feel comfortable with him, he don't feel comfortable with me. It's not how friends should be. It's how you are with people you don't know, people you haven't seen before, that sort of thing. It's natural to have some haya, to have some khajal, to have some trepidation around people that you don't know, as we'll come to see the statement of, I think it's Ibrahim ibn Adham, the last statement in this chapter, that he would be very comfortable around his friends, and then somebody came that he didn't know, he would say, Hada jasus. This guy's a spy. You know, people who are like that, right? People who are a little neurotic, a little bit, a little paranoid. See somebody they don't know, say, I think this guy's a jasus. Right? But other than that, he would be comfortable around his friends. على كل, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, مُزَاحُ عَلَى ضَرْبَيْنِ فَمُزَاحٌ مَحْمُودٌ وَمُزَاحٌ مَذْمُومٌ. So there are two types of joking, two types of humor, two types of lightheartedness. One is praiseworthy and commendable, the other is blameworthy. فَأَمَا الْمُزَاحُ الْمَحْمُودُ, as for the type that is praiseworthy, فَهُوَ الَّذِي لَا يَشُوبُهُ مَا كَرِهَ اللَّهُ جَلَّ وَعَلَى. Is that which is not tainted, doesn't have a sha'iba, is not tainted with that which is disliked to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a person, for example, doesn't joke, he doesn't make people laugh by lying. And some people, they tell a joke, right? Such and such and such and such and such and such walked into a bar. The theoretic kadhib, right? Make somebody laugh. Theoretically, such and such and such and such. That must be left off. It's from dishonesty, it's from lying. And there's no such thing as just small lies. Any small lies, it's like everything, small things lead to big things. The person becomes acclimated to dishonesty, and then honesty will become less important and less important to them, to the point that they may become just a dishonest person. He says, so there's that which is not tainted by that which is disliked by Allah Azza wa Jal. And we'll come to see what some of those things are. وَلَا يَكُونُ بِإِثْمٍ وَلَا قَطِيعَةٍ. Likewise, it doesn't contain any type of sin. وَلَا قَطِيعَةِ رَحْمٍ. And it doesn't sever the ties of the womb. It doesn't sever the ties of the womb. A person may joke in a way, talk about, remember that time when you were 4 and you lost control of your bowels? That sort of thing that you should tell about a person, right? That's how people do, cousins and brothers and siblings and sisters and the sort of thing. People around their siblings or their family may tell a joke about somebody or divulge something lightheartedly about somebody. That may enrage them, might upset them, right? It might enrage them, I might upset them. They might not want to talk to you anymore after that, right? I'll mess with so-and-so. People are like that. And people are like that. They like to talk about everything and make a joke about everything. And they're lighthearted in doing so. And generally, you should not be thin-skinned. People have days, though. There's a day, she just ain't in the mood for all that, right? There's a day, it's just, it's a cloudy day, even the sun is out. Your wife is upset with you don't know why. Car's acting funny, driving weird. Your bank account is not how you would like it to be. You got some things in your mind, and then somebody comes to you and says, when are you going to such and such and such and such? Like, what are those LA gears? You can buy you some new shoes, Like, somebody talks about your vehicle, somebody talks about your clothing, somebody talks about, it makes a little lighthearted joke, right? Like, them sweat stains in that thobe. How long you had that thobe? You need some OxyClean or something, right? Somebody else can make that joke with you and it'll be fine. But this person, it's like, no, they crossed the line. They've crossed that line. And he talks about this in this chapter. And that joking is not for everyone. You should joke with people that you are comfortable with, that personally know you, that sort of thing. You joke with everyone. Not everybody is somebody that you could just bust jokes with and be lighthearted with like that, because they may not take it in the best way. وأما المزاح المذموم فهو الذي يشوبه ما كره الله جل وعلا فمن المزاح المذموم تثور العداوة ويذهب البهاء ويقطع الصداقة ويجترئ الدني عليه ويحقر الشريف به. They mention some things that are kind of synonymous, but we'll list them. He says, from that which is disliked and criticizable, if that's a word, of joking, is that which tathuru al-adawa, that which brings about and exacerbates an adawa, enmity between people, which flares up adawa between people. Allah tabarak wa ta'ala says, وَقُولِ عِبَادِي يَقُولُ اللَّهِ هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنْزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. Say to my servants, they are to say that which is absolutely better and best. Indeed, the shaitan wants to cause nazr between them, rancor and hatred between them. Indeed, the shaitan is a clear and open enemy to mankind. So if a person is making a joke that hurts a person's feelings, or that gets under a person's skin, or gets on a person's nerve, or something of the sort, then this is not min al-qawl billati hiya ahsan, saying that which is ahsan, that which is better and best in this situation. So anything tathuru al-adawa wa yadhhab al-baha, and it removes al-baha, any pleasantness from the face of a person. You make a joke, and the person, al-bashar, he is called al-bashar because of his bushra, and because of his bishra, the complexion of his skin, right? The tone, his intonation. He cannot hide his feelings, right? Doesn't have a poker face all the time, as they say, right? So if he's upset, he looks a particular way, right? If he's, excited, intimate passions, that sort of thing, he looks a particular way. It can be seen on his face. His wife said, she said, oh goodness. Right? If he's ashamed, he looks a particular way. If he's embarrassed, if he's afraid, he may become yellowish in his complexion, that sort of thing. And his complexion changes with his mood. Right? It changes with his mood. يَذْهَبُ الْبَهَاءُ. You see a person, being lighthearted, and you're joking with that person, and his baha all of a sudden is gone. Right? And his happiness is gone, and his joy in his face, and the radiance in his face has disappeared. Right? He went from, his sun, from his face looking like a shining sun or being pleasant and looking radiant to looking like gritty sandpaper. Right? His brow furrows, and he has an M in his forehead or a W in his forehead. Right? He's scowling now. Probably a good time to take it down a little bit. Issue an apology if you need to. وَيَقْتَعُ الصَّدَاقَةِ. He said the type of joking that is hated to Allah is that which يَقْتَعُ الصَّدَاقَةِ. It cuts off brotherhood, cuts off friendship. And it makes people not be friends with each other anymore. وَيَجْتَرِئُ الدَّنِيُّ عَلَيْهِ. Sometimes people are friends for a long period of time. And then as they get a little older and a little bit more mature, or should be a little bit more mature, and you may treat somebody. Ibn al-Qayyim talks about this, I believe, in I'lam al-Waqi'in. He talks about how a person may become a person of status or authority, become a qadi, or become a alim, become a mufti or something of the sort, or become an amir, become a governor, or somebody of any from what they call dihqan, any from the leaders of the tribes and that sort of thing. And you may know a person from the time that they're young, but now they have a position of status, authority, and people generally treat them with respect. And here you come along. Remember, I was hanging out outside of the house of Sheikh Rabi'a, and a brother that I know, who's my elder, who's very beloved to me, we all just had a beautiful majlis, wall to wall, front to back, in the home of Sheikh Rabi'a after he moved to Al-Madinah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve him. And it was, over the years, probably the most beautiful. And this was everybody who was there. From the Dawah, alhamdulillah, from America and the UK, it was probably the most memorable sitting that we had with the Shaykh. Tremendous, phenomenal gathering, and alhamdulillah, the Shaykh made time just for us. Nobody from any other lands was allowed in the home of the Shaykh. It was beautiful, mashallah, mubarak. I remember just being in this good feeling, and I sat outside of the home of Shaykh Rabi, and his brother, who was in the country at the same time, he pulled his car, he squealed his tires, and he jumped out and started shadowboxing with me outside of the home of the Shaykh. Now I love the brother, he's my elder, and but I really wanted to choke him a little bit, right? This is not, alhamdulillah, I'm the imam of the masjid, I'm here with the administration of our masjid. It's a very serious type of situation. You just jump out and, what in the world are you doing? It was strange. Even the brothers around me, because, they didn't know who this brother was. And I've known this brother for decades, literally, right? Alhamdulillah, one of the very first people I met as a new Muslim, right? And I love the brother to death, alhamdulillah, may Allah preserve him and bless him. And he's my elder, and he's done a lot of good for me over the course of my life, But, we got lightweight, some goons with us sometimes, right? Some people that are on high alert for security, people who are cut from a certain cloth, who come from certain backgrounds. They gotta read me. Imagine if somebody just came up in the masjid right now and did that. You would say, this, there's a time for everything, and this is not the time for that, right? You don't come in the masjid shadowboxing during a class, that sort of thing. It's just strange, right? So there are certain things, and يَقْتَعُ الصَّدَاقَةِ, and that could, in certain situations, destroy a friendship, right? If that person had been a little bit younger, or been somebody I didn't know for that long, I'd be like, I ain't talking to my mans no more, right? This guy right here, I'm putting him on block, I'm gonna go right into my settings, he can't call me, he can't text me, I don't want to be bothered with this person, right? So he said, يَجْتَرِيُ الدَّنِيُّ عَلَيْهِ وَيَجْتَرِيُ الدَّنِيُّ عَلَيْهِ. Sometimes when you're too jokey with a person, people who are from the low lives, from the people of Safala, right? Foolish people, the Sufaha, may be may find the audacity, if they find that you're a little too lighthearted, that you're a little too jokey, that sort of thing, you might find a person who is dani, a person who is a lowlife, a person who is a bum, might find the audacity to try to play the dozens with you, try to be insulting, that sort of thing. And so everything has its parameters, everything has any wisdom that's attached to it. وَيُحْقَرُ الشَّرِيفُ بِهِ. Likewise, a person who is sharif, a person who is noble and respected, if they are too lighthearted and joke too much, they may become denigrated because of that. They may be denigrated, disrespected, or held in contempt because of that. أخبرنا محمد بن المنذر, as a benefit that what I mentioned from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned actually the statement of Musa to Fir'aun. When he mentioned that if somebody has some jah or some type of sultan or some type of mansib, some type of degree of influence or something of the sort, you should treat them with a certain degree of respect, right? And not just be lighthearted with them, that sort of thing, because everybody else around that person is respectful. And this may be something foreign to them. It may be something foreign to them. There's a tremendous statement collected by Sahib Uyun al-Akhbar, Minhu Ibn Qutaybah, rahimahullah ta'ala. He has a book called Kitab al-Su'adad. Kitab al-Su'adad, the leaders of a siyada of leadership, the qualities of leadership, so on and so forth. And a tremendous book called Uyun al-Akhbar, very important book that collects statements about character and correct mannerisms and how the Arabs were in the early generations and this sort of thing. It even brings statements from like the Persians in the past, any statements of wise people from Persia before Islam, and just wise statements in general. And there are many books that I like, but this is one of the most important books like that. He brings a statement, Ibn Qutaybah, rahimahullah ta'ala, from Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais. Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, rahimahullah ta'ala, that the person who is sharif, or the sayyid, عند غير قومه ذليل. السيد عند غير قومه ذليل. The person who is a sayyid, he's a leader amongst his people. Amongst other than his people is dhalil. He's low and humiliated. He's low and humiliated. There's a well-known narration of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak. He was traveling with the military. Right? You know, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, he fought in many battles. There were famous incidents. He was skilled on the battlefield, right? Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, he was waiting for some people who didn't know him to finish drinking from a well. And he tried to get close, and there are no lines. There's no such thing as waiting in a line anywhere on earth except America, I think. Maybe the West, people have this thing where they patiently wait in a line for somebody. Sometimes you just have to elbow your way in, make some izdiham, kind of push your way in. You have to be a little pushy to get your way, right? So he said Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, he tried to get close to the well, or too close to the pond, and some people just shoved him down. And he said he smiled. He took it with a light heart, that sort of thing. You find narrations like there's another narration from Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais, where a man, he came to him, وَسَبَّهُ, and he started to just verbally attack him. And he was walking, they said, Ahnaf, he was walking from his masjid to his neighborhood, to his hay. And his hay where his qabila, his tribe and his people live. Ahnaf ibn Qais never ever was a governor, was a judge or anything of the sort, but he was a leader of his people. Right? Without ever having any wilayah officially. Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais rahimahullah ta'ala. They said he waited. He said he was about to walk into his neighborhood and he just waited. And the man, he just was venting. He just going off and just saying one insult after another. He said, Antahit, khalast, you done? He said, because before we walk any further, I just want you to say everything that you have to say, because there's some people, and who won't like the things that you're saying to me that's over here. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to get hurt, so if there's anything else you want to say, just go ahead and say it before we take a step, any further, before we walk any further. So generally, a person should be respectful with everybody that they deal with, especially people who are their elders. You don't, treat your elder in age or knowledge in a way that you would treat your peer, this sort of thing. All these things are common sense, but common sense is not as common as we would have liked it to be. فيشتري الدني ويحقر الشريف به. أخبرنا محمد بن المنذر حدثنا إبراهيم بن محمد الرقي حدثنا أبو موسى الأنصاري حدثنا بكر بن سليم قال سمعت ربيعة يقول إياكم المزاح فإنه يفسد المروءة ويغل الصدر. We say that by Rabi'a. Rabi'a here, I believe, is the one they call Rabi'atul Ra'i. Rabi'atul Ra'i was the Shaykh of Imam Malik. Rabi'atul Ra'i, Rabi'a ibn Abdul Rahman. يقول, I heard him saying, إياكم المزاح, I warn you from al-muzah, from joking. فإنه يفسد المروءة, because it ruins, corrupts a person's muru'ah, it ruins and taints a person's muru'ah. Muru'ah, loosely manhood or womanhood, dignity, right? وَيُغِلُّ صَدْرٍ, and it inflames the chest, it causes ghil, and it causes rancor in the hearts of the chest of people towards one another. أخبرنا محمد بن سعيد القزاز حدثنا الفيض بن الخضر التميمي حدثنا عبد الله بن خبيق قال كان يقال لا تمازح الشريف فيحقد عليك ولا تمازح الوضيع فيجترئ عليك. Abdullah bin Khubayk said that it used to be said, I love these statements, كان يقال, used to be said, perhaps in Jahiliyyah, perhaps in Islam, but whatever the case, it's a statement of wisdom, perhaps by the Sahaba, perhaps by the Tabi'een. كان يقال, it used to be said, meaning that this was common knowledge, common wisdom, right? Common wisdom. كان يقال, it used to be said, لا تمازح الشريف, don't joke with a sharif, a person who is dignified, a person of high status. فيحقد عليك, let's say he has al-hiqd against you. Al-hiqd, the scholars they say, is إمساك العداوة تربص لفرصتها. The Mandur says in Lisan al-Arab, let's say he should hold a grudge against you. Grudge, the scholars they say, al-hiqd, al-huqad, is that a person hides their adaw. So they stand there smiling. They're like, yes, just wait. وَتَرَبُّصْ لِفُرْسَتِهَا, he said. And they wait for the opportunity to get back at you, right? For intiqam. For intiqam. And intiqam, qabr al-ukhuwa. And intiqam is the grave of brotherhood, brothers. Intiqam, and he waiting to get back at people, looking for your opportunity to strike. And he is the grave of brotherhood. Allah protect us from it. He says, so if you joke with the sharif, and he may have hiqd against you, he might hold a grudge against you. وَلَا تُمَازِحْ الْوَضِيعَ, likewise don't joke with a person who is a low life, and a person who is from the ra'ah, from the ghawgha, from the people of dana'a, and the people of low ambition, and the petty people, right? The people of safaha. And the people of safaha are the people who are tafihun. Al-wadi' al-tafih is a petty person. A petty person. Some people are petty, right? Some people are petty. You could just be very, very lighthearted with them. They'll get all bent out of shape. Want to fight you, so on and so forth. Be in front of the masjid trying to fight a brother or a sister, try to fight a sister. Alhamdulillah, as the communities grow, we haven't seen stuff like that in a long time. But there used to be a time you used to see some things, right? You used to see some things, Alhamdulillah, I remember we had the Hereafter conference at Masjid al-Rahman. It was beautiful. It was one of the most well-attended conferences I've ever seen. And at the very end of the conference, after Salat al-Asr, two sisters got into a fist fight. I was hot. I was the imam of the masjid. I'm hot. I'm fuming, right? I'm fuming. I want to ban these sisters from ever. And they were co-wives, of course. Right? They were co-wives. They're boxing on the musalla. You're like, La ilaha illallah. What in the world is wrong with people, right? So I remember one of our dear elder brothers from the dua, I don't want to say his name. He said, MashaAllah Mubarak. MashaAllah Mubarak. He says, man, after all these days, after, all this time, this long seminar, there's only one fist fight. He said, MashaAllah, we're growing up. Alhamdulillah. Ala kulli. And a person may be a person who is tafi, a person who is petty. You make a joke with them, they take it too seriously. And يَجْتَرِيُ عَلَيْكَ, they have a jur'ah, and jara'a and jur'ah, and they have audacity against you. And he encourages them or provokes them to behave in an audacious fashion towards you. He said, وَأَنْشَرَنِي مُحَمَّدْ بن عبد الله البغدادي أكرم جليسك لا تمازح بالأذى إن المزاح ترى به الأضغان كمن مزاح جذ حبل قرينه أي قطع بسرعة حبل قرينه فتحزنت من أجله الأقران. He says, honor your jalis, the person sitting with you, and either your associate, the person who you sit with. As was said by Ibn Abbas, he said, أكرم ناسي عندي جليسي. The person who was most honored with me is the person who was sitting with me. You know, Prophet ﷺ had very dignified manners. Now, you used to observe this from our brother Abu Wais, rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah have mercy upon him. And that he, out of more than anybody, even more than Mashaykh, I can't think of somebody who had the adab of al-mujarasa more than him. May Allah have mercy upon him. And either have those etiquettes that are found in the sunnah. If a person is talking to you, that you turn your body towards that person, and that you face him. And if somebody tries to interrupt and interject something, you act like they didn't even say anything. And you wait till this person has finished what they have to say until you turn your attention to another person. It takes some serious focus and skill and intelligence to do that. And so the jalis of a person, they should feel honored sitting in your presence. They should feel like, as was said about Umar ibn al-As, you know the narration. Umar ibn al-As, he said to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he asked the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who is the best of people? He used to think, because of the treatment of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam towards him, he said, كنت أظن أنني خير الناس. I used to think that I was خير الناس. Now imagine, Umar ibn al-As, right? Umar ibn al-As was that man before Islam, may Allah be pleased with him, who later became Muslim, who went all the way to Ethiopia to try to get the Najashi to turn the Muslims back over to the Quraysh so that they could be persecuted some more. Who stood against the Prophet ﷺ as an Amir on the battlefield, and many battles, who had military skill, and who had influence with his people. He was from the heads of the Quraysh. That after he accepted Islam, the Prophet ﷺ treated him so well, he said, حَتَّى ظَنَنْتُ أَنَّنِي خَيْرَ النَّاسِ, to the point that I thought that I was the best of people. So I said, Ya Rasulullah, who is better? Ana Abu Bakr. Authentic hadith, he said, oh Messenger of Allah, who is better, me or Abu Bakr? I said, Abu Bakr. He said, well, who's better, me or Umar? I said, well, Umar. He said, حَتَّى وَدِدْتُ أَنِي لَمْ أَسْأَلْهُ. He said, to the point I could ask him, then I started to wish I didn't ask. But a person should feel honored, right? A person should feel honored. Ibn Qayyim, when he talks about as-sidq as a concept, as-sidq, which is azim, a determination, he says there's two things. We mentioned this many times, but let's apply it to our dealings with people, right? Because there's a person who's sadiq fi ukhuwatihi wa fi mu'asharatihi ma'a zawjatihi, and so on and so forth. There's a person who is sadiq in their dealings with people. As-sidq is that a person gives their best effort, badlul juhd, ma'a adam al-iltifat ila ma siwah. A person that give their best effort without being distracted. Because in order for you to give your best effort, you have to not be distracted. But this is our situation in our homes. Everybody's on their mobile device, right? Everybody's on their mobile device. Everybody's not focused on what the other is saying. The parent calls out to the child calls out to the parent, the husband calls out to the wife calls out to the husband. Huh? Hold on. What are you doing? Tweeting and texting. Wasting time. You're doing nothing. Right? You're doing nothing. A person, they deserve your time. Especially our wives, they deserve our time. At the end of a long day, being home with the wild children that she bore for you. Right? Then you go home and you're distracted. You go home, you don't have any time for her. You go home. So, this is something that is from the utmost importance. That people focus on each other. That they turn towards one another. And that they akrim jalisa, as a poet says here, akrim jalisaka, honor your jalis. And there are entire books that have been compiled about the adab of al-mujalasa, the etiquettes of how to sit with people and mingle with people and socialize with people. These sorts of things that are from the beauty of Islam. From the beauty of Islam. From the etiquettes is what is mentioned here. أكرم جليسك لا تمازح بالأذى. Honor your jalis, the person that's sitting with you. Whether they be your spouse, whether they be your guest, whether they be just a person in the masjid. The person who is sitting next to you, who is talking to you. أكرم جليسك لا تمازح بالأذى. Do not joke in an abusive way, in a harmful way. In a way that is aggravating. إن المزاح ترى به الأذغان. Indeed, al-muzah, joking, brings about, exposes al-adghan. Adghan, the plural of dhaghina, means al-hiqd, spite, rancor, and grudges, and these sorts of things. كم من مزاح جذ حبل قرينه. How many times has a person joked, and the joke جذ حبل قرينه, أي قطعه بسرعة, and he quickly severed the connection that they had with their friend, and he brought a friendship to a quick end. فَتَحَزَّنَتْ مِنْ أَجْلِهِ الْأَقْرَانُ. And so people who are companions of one another were remorseful thereafter and sad because of how they had conducted themselves. قال أبو حاتم المزاح في غير طاعة الله مسلبة للبهاء مقطعة للصداقة يورث الذغن وينبت الغل وإنما سمي المزاح مزاحا لأنه زاح عن الحق. وكم من افتراق بين أخوين وحجران بين متآلفين كان أول ذلك المزاح. He says that al-muzah, that joking, in that which is outside of obedience to Allah, meaning that which involves disobedience to Allah, maslabatun lil-baha maqta'atun lis-sadaqa yurithu dhighn wa yunbitu al-ghil. Really just reinforcing everything that he already said, right, of the mafasid. These are the mafasid, right? They cause hatred and dislike for one another. They break friendships up and marriages up and these sorts of things. وَإِنَّمَا سُمِيَ الْمُزَاحُ مُزَاحًا. And al-muzah is called muzah لأنه زاح عن الحق. And because zaha عن الحق, meaning that it goes away from the truth. It goes away from the truth. Al-haq in the Arabic language has two meanings. And the first meaning is al-mutabaqa lil-waqi'. Al-mutabaqa lil-waqi'. The haq is that which is mawjood, and that which is matloob. A matloob al-naf'. Mawjood, a mutabiq lil-waqi'. It actually exists. It's not something غير موجود that doesn't actually exist, right? That's called kadhib. And so he says it's called that لأنه زاح عن الحق, because it goes away from the haq, and that's with both meanings of haq. The haq is that which is true and that which is beneficial. It's the meaning of haq in the Arabic language, that which is true and that which is beneficial. The scholars even explain in some great detail that these two meanings of the haq, they are the cornerstones of Islam, right? That which is true and that which is beneficial. That which is true of akhbar, that which is naf'a, matlub al-naf'a, are the ahkam of the religion, right? The do's and the don'ts, the commands and the prohibitions are beneficial for a person, and they are for his own good to do, right? So the truth is that which is true, factual, and that which is beneficial, that which is beneficial. So joking is called joking in the Arabic language because it goes away from the haqq. It goes away from the haqq. Meaning sometimes people tell jokes in a sarcastic fashion that are not true. Or tell jokes that involve lying to make people laugh, even if it's known that what they are saying is untrue. It should not be done because zaha an al-haqq. Or it goes away from that which is nafi', that which is beneficial, meaning that it brings about some type of harm. وكم من افتراق بين أخوين وحجران بين متآلفين كان أول ذلك المزاح. And how many times have two brothers or friends split up, and how many times have two people in a state of ta'aluf, of mutual harmony, boycotted and abandoned one another? That's something that started as muzah, started as a joke. It's just a joke. حدثنا محمد بن المنذر حدثنا محمد بن أحمد بن الحسين القرشي حدثنا الأسود بن عامر عن أبي إسرائيل عن الحكم قال كان يقال لا تماري صديقك ولا تمازحه فإن مجاهدا رحمه الله كان له صديقا فمازحه فأعرض كل واحد منهما عن صاحبه فما زاده عن السلام حتى مات. Al-Hakam, he said rahimahullah ta'ala, that it used to be said, do not argue with your friend and do not joke with him. Do not argue with your friend and do not joke with him. Meaning in that which is beyond what is healthy, that which is helpful. Right? And do not argue with your friend and don't joke too much with him. فَإِنَّ مُجَاهِدًا, for indeed Mujahid, Mujahid ibn Jabr, the scholar of Tafsir, indeed Mujahid had a friend. He used to have a friend. كَانَ لَهُ صَدِيق. He used to have a friend. فَمَازَحَهُ. So, he joked with him, or he joked with him. It's not clear. مَازَحَهُ. And who joked with who? They joked with each other, or one joked with the other. فَأَعْرَضَ كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا عَنْ صَاحِبِهِ. These are purposely phrased in a way to not assign blame to one or the other, right? And so each of them turned away from the other. Stopped dealing with the other. عَنْ صَاحِبِهِ فَمَا زَادُهُ عَنِ السَّلَامِ حَتَّى مَاتٍ. And they didn't speak to each other beyond the salams until they died. They didn't speak to each other besides the salams until they died. قال أبو حاتم وإن من المزاح ما يكون سببا لتحييج المراء. Indeed, there is some muzah, Abu Hatim says, rahimullah, ibn Hibban. Indeed, there is some muzah, some types of joking, forms of joking, ما يكون سببا لتحييج المراء, that brings about or inflames the passions of al-mira, and you have argument between people. فالواجب على العاقل اجتنابه. A person makes what they thought was a light-hearted joke, an insensitive joke, and the person's like, nah. Like, nah, man, wallahi, because such and such. I'll put you on full blast, right? Talk about this, that, and the third, and then it becomes an argument. Now you feel the need to save face in front of people. Now you're being accused of being dishonest and being a liar. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, then you go and insult that person. And now you're both in the schoolyard again, you're 10. Right? You're 10. And you're exchanging insults with one another. It started as a joke, and it turned to al-mira, it turned to argument. And this happens even with families. It happens even between spouses. A person should be careful. This is an advice that some of our scholars give. They mention a statement that I believe is mentioned by Umar in this chapter. مَنْ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عُرِفَ بِهِ. مَنْ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عُرِفَ بِهِ. If you do something a lot, you will become known as the person who is like that. You become known by that thing. That thing will define who you are. That thing will define who you are. So a person, there's a fine line, there's a thin line. As some of the Salaf, they said, إِنَّ الرَّجُلَ فِي بَيْتِهِ لَصَبِيٌّ. Indeed, a man in his home is a sabi. Indeed, a man in his home is a child. There are things that you would do in your home with your wife and your children, joking around, being lighthearted, that they know of you. You're like that, your wife is like that, your children are lighthearted. And as a family, that's how families are, right? But there's a thin line between being lighthearted and doing things that cause people to lose respect for you. Because as the father and as the mother, as the parent, there are certain boundaries that cannot be crossed. There's a certain amount of haiba that must be maintained. A certain amount of respect that must be maintained. And once it is gone, there is no restoring it. Once it is gone, there is no restoring it. مَنْ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عُرِفَ بِهِ. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, فَالْوَاجِبُ عَلَى الْعَاقِلِ اجْتِنَابُهُ. Therefore, it is incumbent, necessary, important for an intelligent person to avoid joking too much. لِأَنَّ الْمِرَاءَ مَضْمُومٌ فِي الْأَحْوَالِ كُلِّهَا. Because there is no situation where arguing is praiseworthy. There is no situation where arguing is praiseworthy. Some of the scholars they mentioned is Ibn Qudama, Najmuddin, Ahmad ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, rahimahullah ta'ala, author of the book Mukhtasar min Hajj al-Qasideen, has a long story. We won't go into the story of what the book is. He says in Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, Allah have mercy upon him, that from the rights of brotherhood is to leave off saying things that upset your brother. And from that is arguing. He says, and from that is arguing. He said, there are two evils in arguing. The first evil in arguing, he said these two evils, if they were the only evils in arguing, they would be enough to leave out arguing. The first is intisabu akhika ila safar, that you accuse your brother of al-humq or safar or al-jahl, of being ignorant or being foolish. Right? So when you argue with somebody, then you're being condescending. And at the same time you're being condescending, that you're showing takabbur, you're showing arrogance. These are the two mafasid. So you're pumping yourself up at the expense of somebody else, at the expense of putting somebody else down. When you argue with somebody, then there's somebody who is right and somebody who is wrong. When you argue with somebody, then you are belittling them, while at the same time exalting yourself. And both of these things are blameworthy. Both of these things are blameworthy. And they're enough of an evil. He said, وَلَا يَخْلُو الْمُمَارِ مِنْ أَنْ يَفُوتَهُ أَحَدُ رَجُلَيْنِ فِي الْمِرَاءِ إِمَّا رَجُلٌ هُوَ أَعْلَمُ مِنْهُ فَكَيْفَ يُجَادِلُ أَنْ هُوَ دُونَهُ فِي الْعِلْمِ. He says, the person who wants to argue with somebody, the one who is arguing with is going to be one of two types of people, generally. Either going to be somebody who is more knowledgeable than him, or somebody who is far less knowledgeable than him. So if somebody is more knowledgeable than you, why are you going to argue with somebody more knowledgeable than you? This is a well-known narration, some of my favorite. I want to say it's Ibn Abbas. He was teaching in the Haram. He had a courtesy in the Haram, right? A chair in the Haram. He said a man came and it's a narration about combining, what's called a Jam'u Suri, right? Between Maghrib and Isha, where you delay Maghrib for a lesson or something of the sort. If there's a lesson, you delay it up until close to the time of Isha, then you pray Maghrib, and then right afterwards you pray Isha. You combine them together. It looks like you're combining them together, but in fact you're actually praying Maghrib in his time, praying Isha in his time. They said a man came up, and I think they said he was a Bedouin, and he kept pointing up with his hand to the sky, right? He kept pointing up with his hand to the sky, like, look at the time, it's time to pray. Look at time, it's time to pray. And Ibn Abbas said something to the effect like, are you teaching me my religion now? You're teaching me my religion now? Alhamdulillah. And all of a sudden, you're the ustad, and I'm the tilmeeth. Let me sit down. Would you like to sit in the chair? Ibn Abbas was like incensed, right? Like, some ignorant person, clearly the ignorant person gets up, and he's talking to an alim from the kibar ulama of the Sahaba. Like, it's time to pray. It's time to pray. He knows it's time to pray. They're in the haram. There's no roof. He can see the sky. He's not blind, right? He can see the sky as clear as you can see the sky. So generally, if you argue with somebody more knowledgeable than you, it's a bad idea. And if you argue with somebody substantially less knowledgeable than you, that's also a bad idea. You don't argue with a person who is more knowledgeable than you. You don't argue with a person who is a fool, right? You don't argue with a person who is a fool. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, so these are the two possible scenarios. Either this person is more knowledgeable than you, so how are you going to argue with somebody more knowledgeable than you? أو يكون ذلك أعلم منه فكيف يماري من هو أعلم منه. Or يكون ذلك أعلم منه, or he says first, إما رجل هو أعلم منه. He's really saying the same thing here. So it's either a person that you are more knowledgeable than, or they are more knowledgeable than you. Both situations, long story short, shorter story shorter, don't do it, right? Don't debate with ignorant people. Don't debate with people who are more knowledgeable than you. Just don't debate. Don't argue with people. وَلَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ عُمَرْ بن حفص البزاز. I commonly mention this story. I will mention it again, just because it's humorous. We had a brother in our community, in our hometown. He used to argue about everything imaginable. And he used to sit in the masjid and argue with everybody about everything. So one day we decided, because he was running people away, so we decided to sit with the brother, right? We decided to sit with the brother and advise him, because he was being a fitna in the community. And for 2 hours, he sat and argued with us about how he doesn't like to argue. 2 hours, not 1 hour. 2 hours, this man sat and argued with us. Then I set him up, and that was the end. I set him up, and he was talking about, the character of certain people, right? He was being insulting, talking about brothers walking around here, being all extra shy and stuff like that. My daddy raised me to be a man. He's just going off on this long tangent, right? And I said, well, I know of somebody who is well respected from the scholars. Now, mind you, this is about 20 years ago. I was much younger, right? I know somebody who was very, very well respected from the most knowledgeable of people, from the greatest of scholars, right? And in his time, he was the greatest scholar of his time. Who it was said about him by the closest people to him that he was shyer than a virgin girl in her bedchamber. He's like, A'udhu billah. The brother I was sitting with, he was like, just stop, Omar. Just stop, man, before they make this man fall into kufr or something, right? It's a hadith about the Prophet ﷺ, right? The Prophet ﷺ was shyer than a virgin girl to the end of it, right? So that ended up being the end of the argument. There are some people who argue just because that's what they do, right? And they grow up old and ornery together. Couples. That's all they do all day, every day. They just argue. And they teach it to their children, and their children carry it on. Check yourself how you were raised. Did your parents argue a lot? And if you came up in a certain type of environment where that was something popular, and look at these things that are being mentioned about joking too much in an abusive and harmful way, and weigh your character against the character of the Sunnah, right? The character in the Sunnah. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَلَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ عمر بن حفص البزاج يقول سمعت إسحاق بن الضيف يقول سمعت جعفر بن عون يقول سمعت مسعر بن كدام يقول لابنه كدام إني نحلتك يا كدام نصيحة فاسمع ما قال أب عليك شفيقي أما المزاح مع المراء فضرهما خلقان لا أرضاهما لصديقي إني بلوتهما فلم أحمدهما لمجاور جارا ولا لشقيق والجهل يزري بالفتى في قومه وعروقه في الناس أي عروق. Mis'ar ibn Kidam, he said to his son Kidam, he says, I'm going to give you a sincere advice, O my son Kidam. فَاسْمَ مَقَالِ أَبٍ عَلَيْكَ شَفِيقِ. So listen to the statement of your compassionate, loving father for you. أَمَّا الْمُزَاحُ مَعَ الْمِرَاءِ فَضَرْهُمَا. As for joking and mira and arguing, then leave off the both of them. خُلُقَانِ لَا أَرْضَاهُمَا لِصَدِيقِ. And they are two traits that I'm not pleased with for a friend of mine. I don't want to have a friend who's like that, and I don't advise you to be like that. إِنِّي بَلَوْتُهُمَا فَلَمْ أَحْمَدْهُمَا. And I've tried them out, I've examined both of these things. بَلَوْتُهُمَا. I've examined, perhaps from himself, perhaps from other people. I've examined these things. بَلَوْتُهُمَا خَبَرْتُهُمَا. And I have some experience in dealing with these two things, watching people over the years joke and argue. فَلَمْ أَحْمَدْهُمَا. And I didn't find either of them to be praiseworthy or commendable. لِمُجَاوِرٍ جَارًا وَلَا لِشَقِيقِ. And they are not commendable for neighbors to use, people who are in close proximity to use in dealing with one another, even for the purpose of mu'anas. Even people try to be lighthearted to pass the time. This is a bad idea. It's a bad idea. And for a shaqiq, for a brother towards another brother. وَالْجَهْلُ يُزْرِي بِالْفَتَى فِي قَوْمِهِ. And al-jahl, we know jahl has two meanings. The first is jahl, not knowing something of information. And jahl, which means asafaha, and ignorant behavior. So we say ignorant, right? Ignorant behavior. وَالْجَهْلُ يُزْرِي بِالْفَتَى فِي قَوْمِهِ. And ignorance and foolishness causes a person to be denigrated amongst his people. And he brings down his status and his standing with his people. وَعُرُوقُهُ فِي النَّاسِ أَيُّ عُرُوقِ. And no matter what his lineage is amongst those people, no matter who he's related to, he could be from the ansab of Ahl al-Bayt, he could be from the Ashraf, he could be Hashimi Qurashi, right? Doesn't matter what his lineage is, who he was related to or she was related to, and these sorts of blameworthy traits, no matter who you're related to or what your standing is with the people, they will lower you in the eyes of others. Abu Hatim, he says, Al-Mira'u ukhtu Ash-Shana'an. Al-Mira' is the sister of Ash-Shana'an. Ash-Shana'an, these people have an extreme hatred for one another. كما أن المناقشة أخو العداوة, just as المناقشة, and المناقشة, meaning al-mumara, and debating and arguing with each other, and he is the brother of al-adawa, of enmity. وَالْمِرَاءُ قَلِيلُ نَفْعُهُ, and arguing has very little benefit, وَكَثِيرٌ شَرُّهُ, and very many evils connected to it. وَمِنْهُ يَكُونُ السِّبَابِ, and it causes sibab, it causes people to verbally abuse and revile one another. وَمِنَ السِّبَابِ يَكُونُ الْقِتَالِ, and after insults are traded, that leads to al-qital, that leads to actual fighting. That leads to actual fighting. وَمِنَ الْقِتَالِ يَكُونُ هِرَاقَةُ الدَّمِ, as we mentioned earlier. People say playing the dozens and the street corners and the school ground and so on and so forth. This is a survival mechanism for people in the slums and the poor neighborhoods, so on and so forth. At the same time, the same people say it leads to a lot of bloodshed and killing. So it's not really a survival mechanism then, is it? Right? This is how people learn how to have thick skin. No, it's not. That's how people get killed. Right? I mean, people die for giving people sharp looks and mean looks, dirty looks, lead to bloodshed, lead to gunfire, lead to all kinds of craziness. And mean, cruel words to each other. This sort of thing. As a Muslim, alhamdulillah, tatarafa and kulli hada. Exalt yourself, raise yourself, dignify yourself above all of that. Wear the clothing of a Muslim, carry yourself with the conduct of a Muslim, and all that foolishness, inshallah, will pass you right by. And you won't be affected by it. This isn't advice that we need at our ages, inshallah ta'ala, but many of our youth and sometimes our children need to hear those sorts of things. And alhamdulillah, there are certain etiquettes, certain conditions and stipulations and etiquettes connected to brotherhood and friendship and these sorts of things. If they are not minded and if they are not paid attention to, then a lot of fitna can happen between people. A lot of fitna can happen between people. Allah.